Well, hello everybody. Pastor Joel here with you one more time for the Past Days with Pastor Joel. Just want to remind you, in case you haven't seen these videos, I've been able to put a few more videos out lately, which is nice, but we're up to 120 subscribers. If you are subscriber number 125, that's the next goal we're shooting for, you can let me know. In whatever video you're watching at that time, just leave a comment on the video, say I'm subscriber number 125, or you can contact me through Facebook, let me know you're subscriber 125, and then you can tell me what kind of video you would like me to make. It can have to do with eschatology, it could be another biblical topic, it could be something about cooking or baking if you want to know absolutely nothing after you've watched the video, because I'm only good at eating other people's food and eating their cookies. At any rate, that would be kind of fun. And I got an opportunity, I guess it's been, I want to say 3 or 4 months ago or so. Alan Morton, some of you may know who he is. He runs a publication called Preterist Voice. The website is preteristvoice.org, preteristvoice.org. And if you go to that page, I just checked it again before I did this video, it'll talk about this online conference. And if you scroll to the bottom of that page and then press where it says click here to begin, and it'll take you for the content, to the content rather, of that online conference that was done a while ago. And I had the great honor of participating in one of those sessions with my good friends Darren Gregg and Robert Kuchank. And those are names you should know if you don't already, Darren Gregg and Robert Kuchank. And we did a session on time statements. So you can watch that if you'd like to. Again, if you go to preteristvoice.org, scroll down to the bottom where it says click here to begin, it'll take you to that content. I think we were like number 9 in those series of presentations. There's also a lot of other great stuff there. Daniel Rogers, William Bell, Don Preston, I don't know, some other stuff in there. Glenn Hill, I think, did a session. And so you might benefit from those. But I just wanted to go over a little bit of what we talked about, because time statements are so important to the fulfilled view, aka preterism. And so I'm going to essentially just go through some of those notes that we had. Again, you can listen to that for a little fuller idea of that, but some of you may rather see my face than just listen to something. I don't know, there might be somebody out there who likes looking at me. Could be. It's possible. So at any rate, Darren kind of kicked that off and was talking about some things that C.S. Lewis had said, and you may be aware of this, but some of you might not. If you don't know C.S. Lewis's work, a great Christian theologian and thinker who was an atheist for a lot of his life, and then came to Christ. A book of his that I read, it's been a while since I've read it, but I would recommend it. It's called Surprised by Joy, and that was C.S. Lewis's journey from atheism to becoming a Christian. But C.S. Lewis saw the ramifications of Matthew 24, verse 34, which is, of course, a huge verse and a huge passage for those who are interested in eschatology, really of any stripe. Matthew 24, 34, Jesus leading up to that has talked about a variety of events, rumors of wars, false messiahs, great tribulation, abomination of desolation, the gospel going out to the whole world, and so on. And then Matthew 24, 34, it's recorded that Jesus said all these things will take place within the time of this generation, or before this generation passes away. And of course that's perplexed a lot of people, because it's actually really, really clear what Jesus is saying. And C.S. Lewis said about that verse that it was the most embarrassing verse in the Bible. Here's a man who is a Christian, top shelf theologian, saying this is the most embarrassing verse in the Bible, because he understood correctly what Jesus was saying. Again, it is not hard at all to figure out what Jesus was saying in context. It's hard to believe if we've brought in certain presuppositions to the text. And that's where we started off a little bit in this podcast on time statements, is Darren bringing that up, and I was really glad that he brought that up. And then he kind of said, maybe instead of C.S. Lewis saying that was the most embarrassing verse in the Bible, maybe it's C.S. Lewis who ought to have been a little bit embarrassed, as great as a thinker as he was. And he's been dead now for a while, and I'm assuming now he knows he was wrong. That may have been one of the first things he was told when he entered the pearly gates. I really don't know. Well, my portion of that was to really look at what I see as probably the main pushback to preterism, especially when it comes to the time statements. And there are certainly others, and I've addressed some of those in some articles I've gone over recently. And you might want to check out some of those videos. One was called On Everything But the Bible. Another one, what was the other one called? I don't remember, but you'll see those as some of the last videos that I've put out. And they can be very helpful as far as when people do have their pushbacks, to be able to say, well, have you considered this, or have you thought of this? So I hope those are helpful to you. That's one of the things I want to do, is equip you to be able to have good arguments as you try to persuade people to this view, if you're trying to do that. And so the main pushback that I've heard, and for quite a while I was pretty heavily involved in some Facebook groups that would discuss and debate preterism, like preterism versus futurism groups, partial preterism versus preterism groups, that kind of thing. And so not only did I encounter this a lot from those who don't share to the fulfilled view, but I just saw this a lot. And to me, it's probably the main view, which essentially says, in a general sense, it says that God lives outside of time. Time means nothing to God. But there's a particular verse that's usually used for that, which is, well, the Bible says that to the Lord, a day is like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is like one day. And sure enough, that is in the Bible. And since that's used as a main pushback, I want to talk about that just a little bit. And so we see that in 2 Peter 3:8. And let me just read 2 Peter 3:8, and then I'll tell you where he was reading from. It says, "But do not overlook this one fact, beloved, that with the Lord, one day is as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is as one day." And that's right in the middle when Peter's writing about the elements shall be consumed with fire and so on. And it's a text that at its face value, sure enough, it sounds like a huge cosmic issue happening at the supposed end of time. When we read it from a 21st century Greco-Roman mindset and worldview, it's easy to see how we would come up with that. But in context, we end up finding something very different. So where was Peter quoting from there that he said, with the Lord, a day is as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is as a day? He was quoting from Psalm 90, and it says there, "For 1,000 years in your sight are but as yesterday when it is past, or as a watch in the night." That's Psalm 90 and verse 4. And it's always good when we come across passages in the New Testament where there are verses being quoted to go back to the Hebrew Scriptures, Old Testament, and see what was being said there. And then it would be important too to let's find out the context of Psalm 90, what's going on there. And what we find is that the psalmist really is not trying to focus on what the futurist would say that he's focused on. Psalm 90, the point is being made that while God is eternal, we are not. That's really the point there. It's focusing on God's wrath towards man. As it goes on, it says, "We've been consumed by your anger, and by your wrath we are terrified. You have set our iniquities before you, our secret sins in the light of your countenance." And then it says, "The days of our lives are 70 years, and if by reason of strength they are 80 years, I'm planning to live 100 to be 110, just so you know." Is the psalmist saying here, if you again take what Peter's saying, the way the futurists would want to say it, again, 1,000 days could mean a year to the Lord could mean 1,000 years, and essentially time doesn't really mean anything to God. He doesn't think of time like we do. He doesn't communicate in time to us. If that were the case, and the psalmist is saying here that we're going to live 80 or 70 or 80 years, could I then say, just using logic, that the psalmist could have meant that they were to live to be 70,000 or 80,000 years old, since a day is like 1,000 years? I mean, wouldn't that be using logic? And then the point of Psalm 90 is really, so teach us to number our days, that we may gain a heart of wisdom. So that's really what the intent of the psalmist is. God's eternal. We're not. We don't have wisdom. He does. We're sinful. He's not. We've just got a short time here, and we need to focus on the Lord to gain a heart of wisdom and follow Him. That's really what the psalmist is saying. Moses here was not confused regarding how time works in the lives of human beings, and Peter, quoting Moses, wasn't confused either. Now this is proved because the verse in 2 Peter, right after the verse that says a day is as 1,000 years, 1,000 years as a day, says this: God is not slow. as some count slowness. Now, in that pushback that again has come to me personally many times, and that I've seen pushed against others that have come to the fulfilled understanding many times, in that pushback, the verse 9 of 2 Peter 3 verse 9, 2 Peter 3 verse 9, that's always left out. Because that's the one that says God is not slow. God will not tarry. That verse, again, is left out when futurists are trying to refute the meaning of timing words. In other words, if Peter was meaning to say that things that seem imminent were actually going to be stretched out for thousands of years, why did he then say God is not slow in fulfilling his promises? To me, if God has waited for thousands of years, he's slow. Now, no one's going to argue, at least I'm not going to argue, that God doesn't live outside of time. But we do live inside time, and God is not the author of confusion, right? So God communicates to us as people in ways we can understand. He always does that, whether it's in terms of timing or how we are to love our neighbor or how we're to go about our lives. He's not trying to confuse us. So though he lives outside of time and he's eternal and we're not, he communicates to us in a way that we can understand. Now, so you might just test that out, do it graciously, do it gently, do it lovingly, but when people just say that, don't just think, oh, well, yeah. I mean, you might say to them, okay, well, let's say God lives outside of time, but does he speak to us in a way that we can understand? And then you might just ask, again, nicely, do you know where Peter's quoting from? And go to that psalm. If nothing else, we want to make sure that we don't just let people get away with just some standard pushback without then us asking questions and saying, well, wait a minute, have you really thought that? Have you really thought that through? Because sometimes just loosening up that paradigm somebody might have will be enough to get them into further study and be a good Berean of the Scriptures, which is exactly what we want, regardless of the conclusion they land on. Let's get into the Word of God and see what it really says. The other huge problem with this pushback is what I call, now this is a long term, and I used it in the podcast just for fun, so I'll use it here, the double standard fallacy of eschatological reverse chronology. You get that? Get your pencil, get your pen out. The double standard fallacy of eschatological reverse chronology. You'll probably not use it in a sentence ever. But here's how it works. And again, I called it that just for fun. But listen, because I think, to me, this is a pretty profound point. Every single time futurists argue against the time statements, they're saying near, at hand, soon, etc., could actually mean hundreds or thousands of years in the future, right? It doesn't mean soon. It doesn't mean at hand. It doesn't mean near. When the judge says he's outside the door, it could mean anything. It could mean hundreds or thousands of years. After all, time means nothing to God, and with God, a day can mean 1,000 years, and so on. That's the way the argument goes. Okay? So let me go to a couple other places in Scripture here. And I think, again, this is really important. This is going to be really helpful as you present this. This is Numbers 24:17, this sort of odd story of Balaam and his donkey. Numbers 24:17. In the prophecy of Balaam, he says, I see him, but not now. Pardon me. I behold him, but not near. A star shall come out of Jacob, and a scepter shall rise out of Israel. Okay, that's Numbers 24:17. Focus carefully on I see him, but not now. I behold him, but not near. Now that prophecy was spoken some 1,400 years before Christ, and God said it was not near. No one has ever said to me, Joel, I think that actually God was saying that could have happened right away because time means nothing to God. Do you see how this is twisted around? If you throw it in the other direction, it immediately just blows up this argument because it's never used that way. In other words, somebody with a futurist paradigm only is going to use that day as like 1,000 years when it's going to support their idea. They never think it through the other way around. Let me give you one more, which should be familiar to many of you. The same thing applies to Daniel. When Daniel was told, seal up the prophecy because it was many days in the future, that was fulfilled some 500 years later. Does anyone really think by many days in the future that God actually could have meant it was going to happen immediately? Of course not. So there's a double standard here. The futurist wants to say, soon, near, at hand, he's right at the door, etc. Doesn't have to mean that, because after all, with the Lord, a day is as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is with one day. Following that logic, we ought to be able to say, when Balaam was saying the time is not now, when Daniel was told don't seal up the prophecy, when other prophecies in Scripture say they weren't to happen for a long time, then we ought to be able to say, using that same logic, but actually, because time doesn't mean anything to God, those could have happened immediately. And no futurist is going to agree with that, and they shouldn't. The fact is, this stuff, folks, and I don't mean to be offensive here, these statements, soon, at hand, near, at the door, this generation, they are not difficult to understand at all. In fact, as I was coming into this paradigm and this understanding, which in my case, and I'm not like bragging about it because it wasn't me, it's something the Lord did. Nobody showed it to me. It was actually through studying the Scriptures, not even studying eschatology. And if you want to know more about that, you can watch my video on here, How I Came to the Fulfilled Understanding. It's called something like that. Or I've got a couple interviews. I did an interview with Ward Finley a while back, Michael Miano. Also did a testimony with Burroughs of Berea, which launches next Thursday, August 3rd. And I talk a little bit about that. Now, after I saw some of this, then, yes, I reached out to people and have gleaned an amazing amount of knowledge from incredible people with bigger, more functional brains than I have. Let me tell you. But initially, I didn't find it that way. But the point is, I was talking to with Scott Fisher. Some of you may know that name at one point, who had been a preterist already for quite a while. And he said to me, "What's been most surprising to you?" This is shortly after I came to full preterism. He said, "What's been most surprising to you?" And I thought, what a great question. You know what was most surprising? How clear these time statements and the timing are. Especially when it comes to Christ's second coming. I mean, I couldn't believe it. I mean, there are other theological things that, to be honest, I don't have quite as good a handle on. It's like, yeah, this one's still a little bit murky. You know, I'm still wrestling with this stuff. I'm not saying I have every single nuance and answer figured out, but when I'm saying the general concepts, they're actually like some of the easiest things I've ever seen in the Scriptures. Again, the problem here is not that the Scriptures aren't clear. The problem was everything I brought, all the presuppositions I brought to the text. The problem is what denominations teach, or traditions teach, or creeds teach, if it's different than this eschatological paradigm. We bring all that, and it's just so hard. It's like our eyes are closed, our ears are stopped up, and the Scriptures in front of us are actually plain as day, and that's what I told him I was most surprised about. All right? And then I just want to touch a little bit on what Robert Kuchank shared as well. And he has this idea of the time is near. And one of the things, Robert is often referred to as the blue-collar scholar, but he does know a lot. He's a friend of mine, and I talk to him fairly regularly, and I've learned so much from Robert. And, of course, he speaks fairly regularly at Berean Bible Church at conferences and other times, and he's got stuff on Facebook. He writes an article for the Burroughs of Berea. He's all over the place. Just great stuff. But he's pretty up to date on the scholarship, and he acknowledged. He said within the scholarship there, it's not that there are scholars up there scratching their heads saying, I'm not sure what near really means or sooner at hand. They see the implications, and they know the Greek or the Hebrew if they're looking at Old Testament things. But because they don't accept that these things have happened, they've got to find other ways around it. And so one gentleman in particular, Scott Frost. Oh, that's funny. Sam Frost. I used to live in Lincoln, Nebraska. I'm a huge college football fan. Probably enjoy college even more than the NFL. And I lived in Lincoln, Nebraska for a number of years. And for those of you that might be fans, this is when the Cornhuskers got like 3 national championships in a period of, I think, 4 or 5 years. And they were like beating teams like 70-0. I mean, it was ridiculous. They were in their heyday. And Scott Frost was a quarterback on one of those teams. And then he was the most recent coach of Nebraska. So I guess I had a whatever kind of slip it would be that would lead me to say the coach instead of Sam Frost. But Sam Frost, somebody will know that name, and I know people have some strong feelings about him. That's fine. I've talked with Sam too. But he's kind of come to the conclusion that something could be near in time, it's not necessarily near in space. And he uses the example. Here's what because Robert kind of pointed this out. The coffee cup approach. And so this is, again, Robert Kuchank was explaining this to us, and this is on this podcast we did, and here's what is referred to as the coffee cup approach, and this is kind of Sam Frost's idea. Those who hold to this view try to make sort of some sort of distinction between things being spatially near as opposed to being temporally near. Now, if you're confused already, so am I. In a video, I saw one guy use the example, and this was Sam Frost. I can say my coffee cup is near to me. That doesn't mean my coffee cup is near to me. I'm trying not to smirk. In time, it means my coffee cup is near in space. He then goes off into the trajectory about the Lord being near to us in terms of his omnipresence or something like that. When Robert first told me that, which was before we did this podcast, I was actually really upset. I might have been visibly upset. I thought, how much would it suck? Because I love coffee. Now, I don't have a coffee cup here, but I love these things, even though they're a total ripoff. But how much would it suck if I said my Frappuccino, which I've just chilled in my freezer here, I'm going to enjoy right after this video. If I said, this is near to me temporally. So somehow, like out in temporally, in space somehow, it's near to me, but it's not near me spatially. So it's near to me, but I can't have it because it's not really near to me. It's near to me. I mean, I don't even know what it means. Listen, I got a philosophy minor in college. I was a music major with a philosophy minor, and people said, how are you going to make a living doing that? I didn't know, but I came up with something clever. I said I was going to have a philosophical justification for being a poor musician. I thought that was pretty good. And actually, the Lord's blessed me, and I have earned income, at least through some of my life, with music. But I was a philosophy minor. Now granted, I'll just share this. I wasn't the best student at the time, and I sometimes had different substances in my body that did not help with my scholarship, let's say. But I was a philosophy minor, and I still enjoy some philosophy from time to time. But some of these philosophers, while they might have been incredible thinkers, they couldn't write with a pickle, or with a pickle. And I would sometimes like read a paragraph, and I would, we'd get together with classmates and we'd read a paragraph. And my classmates, some of these pretty sharp people, and we'd get done with the paragraph and we'd kind of say, do you agree with whatever this particular philosopher said? And sometimes we'd kind of look at each other and it's like, I'm not sure, because I don't know what he said. That's how I feel about this idea that a coffee cup can be temporally near, but not spatially near, and somehow Jesus is a little bit like that coffee cup. Now, that might not be quite fair, but I mean, if you can figure that out, you can leave that in the comments below. I'll try to entertain it. I'll try to figure out what that means. So let's get back to the main thing here, and then we'll close up shop with this video. Okay, main pushback that I've experienced, and I think a lot of people have, near, soon, at hand, etc., can't mean that, because after all, God's outside of time. Time doesn't really matter to him, and he, it's outside of time. So how can we be sure that he's communicating to us in time? First of all, he's not the author of confusion. He condescends. He condescended ultimately, did he not, in the person of Jesus Christ? Why did he do that? To make himself understandable to us. He wants to help us understand who he is. He wants to help us understand how he thinks, how he works. God is not the author of confusion. If he says soon, near at hand, he's saying that because he knows we do live in time, and he's telling us when things are going to happen. So the pushback just doesn't work. And again, it only works in one direction. No one ever says, when the Bible uses things like it's not at hand, it's far off, the time is not yet, no one says, actually, the Lord might have meant immediately, which they would have to say to be consistent with their particular argument. Okay, and then we go to this, again, kind of bizarre idea that some scholars have come up with that recognize the timing, but say, actually, something is temporally near, but may not be spatially near. And then where we started with C.S. Lewis, who recognized again that when Jesus said this generation, it's exactly what he meant, but C.S. Lewis didn't believe him, said it was the most embarrassing verse in the Bible. Folks, the time statements are powerful. They, I think, along with many other things as well, that we'll talk about in other videos, are the Achilles heel of futurism. Again, if you want to see this whole podcast I was involved with Darren Gregg, Robert Kuchank, go to preteristvoice.org, scroll to the bottom of the page, click where it says click here to begin, and you'll find our session. I think it's number 9. You should check out some of the other sessions there. Some really good stuff there as well. Don't forget, let's keep the subs coming. Like and share this content. Get it out to people that you know will disagree with me. I love to engage with them as well. And try to leave comments about what you think. What would you like to see me do maybe more of in this channel? What kind of things are helpful to you? All that really helps me. So, with that, Pastor Joel saying bye for now.